Good to go? All right. I wasn't too sure of the meaning of never, never, never at that time. And I suppose I had a vague, idea what I had a vague idea that the buses were a free gift, which in the circumstance would not have been beyond the British amalgamated. After a heavy lunch of pounded yam, I was feeling very drowsy. As a rule, I always slept in the afternoon, but Chief Nanga's house was where things tumbled over one another in a scramble to happen first. An afternoon snooze seemed most improper, if not shameful. And I thought, if Chief Nanga could get home at 2 in the morning, be at his desk at 8 a.m. and come back at 2 looking as fresh as a newly hatched chick, why should I, a child of yesterday, by comparison, indulge in such a decadent and colonial habit of taking siesta? So I bravely dozed in my chair while my host and his wife talked about her journey home. She asked if he had found a cook yet to do his meals while she was away. And he said he had asked someone to send one or two along in the evening. Only then did it strike me that they had no cook, only a steward. I wondered how they managed with their dinner parties. A car drew up outside and a young American couple breezed in. Or rather, the wife breezed in, and the husband followed in the wake. "Hi, Micah." "Hi, Margaret," said the woman. "Hi, Jean." "Hi, John," replied the minister, whom I had never heard anyone call Micah until then. But he seemed quite pleased, actually. I was greatly shocked. These two people were no older than I, and yet had the impudence to call Chief Nanga his now almost forgotten Christian name. But what shocked me even more was his reaction. I had turned quickly and anxiously to watch his face contort with fury. But no, he had replied, "Hi, sweetie. Hi, Jean. Hi, John." I couldn't understand. I was dead certain that if I, or any of our people for that matter, had called him Micah, he would have gone rampaging mad. But perhaps I shouldn't have been so surprised. We have all accepted things from white skins that none of us would have brooked from our own people. By the way, we are reading A Man of the People by Chinua Achebe. Mrs. Nanga, whose Christian name I didn't even know until now, seemed less happy. She said, "Hello, hello," and almost immediately withdrew. Her frock caught in the pattern of her buttocks. While Jean flirted eagerly with Micah, I was having some very serious discussion with her husband, who it appeared was one of a team of experts at the time advising our government on how to improve its public image in America. He seemed the quiet type, and I thought a little cowed by his beautiful bumptious wife. But I had no doubt they were both in their different ways excellent ambassadors. He certainly proved most eloquent when the inevitable subject came up at last. Not, I might add, thanks to me. "We have our problems," he said. "Likewise, everyone. Some of my people are narrow as a pin. We have to admit it. But at the same time, we have gotten somewhere. No one is satisfied, but we have made progress. He gave some facts and figures about lynching, which I don't remember now, but I do remember he saying that lynching was not racial in origin, and that up to a year like 1875 or something, there had been more whites lynched than Negroes. And I remember too, he saying that in 5 of these last 10 years, there has been no lynching at all. I noticed. He did not say in the recent years. So you see, I'm sorry I didn't catch your first name. Odili. Odili. Oh, a beautiful sound. May I call you by that? Sure, I said. Sure, I said, already partly Americanized. Mine is John. I don't see why we should call one another Mr. This and Mr. That, like the British. No, nor do I said. What was I saying? He went on. What I was saying, he went on, is that we do not pretend to be perfect, but we have made so much progress lately that I see no cause for anyone to despair. What is important is that we must press on. We must not let up. We just must not be caught sleeping on the switch again. I was still savoring the unusual, but I thought excellent technological imagery when I heard, as though from afar away, John's voice make what I call an outstanding claim. I don't mean it was necessarily false. I simply know enough American history. America may not be perfect, he was saying, but don't forget that we are the only powerful country in the entire history of the world, the only one, and we had the power to conquer others and didn't do it. I must have looked more surprised than I felt. The claim did not as yet strike me with its full weight. I was thinking that this unique act of magnanimity must have happened in a small corner of the world long ago. Yes, said John, in 1945, we could have subdued Russia by placing one atomic bomb in Moscow and another on Leningrad. But we didn't. Why? Well, don't ask me, I don't know. Perhaps we are naive. We still believe in such outdated principles like freedom, like letting every man run his show. Americans have never wished to be involved in anyone's show. As I have suggested, there is something in Chief Nanga's person which attracts drama irresistibly to him. Memorable events were always flying about his stately figure and dropping at his feet as those winged termites driven out of the earth by late rain dance furiously around street lamp and then drop panting to the ground. Here you have John speaking high monologue to me, while his wife seems ready, judging by the look in her eyes, to drag Chief Nanga off to bed in broad daylight. Then a knock at the door, and a young man in heavily starched white shorts and shirt comes in to offer his services as a cook. "Wetin you fit cook?" asked Chief Nanga as he perused the young man's sheet of testimonials. Probably not one of them genuine. "I fit cook European chop like steak and kidney pie, chicken puri, mixed grill, cake omelette. You know sabi cook African chop? Ah, that one I know sabi o. I know sabi am admitted. I no go tell master lie. Okay. Waiting you dey chop for your own house?" I asked, being irritated by the idiot. "Waiting I dey chop for my house," he repeated after me. "Now wow. Now we country chop I dey chop now." "You country chop no be Africa chop?" asked Chief Nanga. Now him admitted they cook, but no be me dey cook am. I get wife for house. My irritation vanished at once, and I joined Chief Nanga's laughter. Greatly encouraged the cook, added, How man wey get family go begin enter kitchen for make bitter leaf soup egusi unless if the man was if the man no get shame. We agree with him, but he lost the job because Chief Nanga preferred bitter leaf and egusi chicken to chicken puri, whatever that was. But I must say the fellow had his point too. As long as a man confined himself to preparing foreign concoctions, he could still maintain the comfortable illusion that he wasn't really doing any such an unmanly thing as cooking. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Jean and John had invited the minister and me to an informal dinner on the very Saturday Mrs. Nanga left for home. Unfortunately, John had to fly to Abraka at short notice to be present at the opening of the new cement factory built by American capital. In the afternoon, John phoned to remind us that the party was still on regardless. The minister promised that we would be there, but just before 7, a most sophisticated-looking young woman had driven in and knocked down all our plans. Chief Nanga introduced her as a barrister, Mrs. Akilo, and said she had come that very minute from another town 80 miles away. She hadn't even checked in at the hotel or washed off the dust of the journey. I thought she was beautiful enough with the dust on, and I remembered the proverbial joke in my village about a certain woman whose daughter was praised for her beauty, and she said, "You haven't seen her yet. Wait till she's had a bath." "Are you in private practice?" I asked Mrs. Akido as Chief Nanga went to answer the phone. "Yes, my husband and I practice jointly." "Oh, he's a lawyer too?" I asked. "Yes, we own a firm of solicitors." I must confess to a certain feeling of awkwardness before a sophisticated, assured manner. The way she spoke, she must have spent her childhood in England, but this awkward feeling was only momentary. After all, I told myself, Chief Nanga, who was barely literate, was probably going to sleep with her that night. "Look, Agnes, why don't you use my wife's bedroom instead of wasting money?" said Chief Nanga, getting back to his seat. "She traveled home today. His phonetics had already moved up 2 rungs to get closer to her. It would have been pathetic if you don't know what he was. If you didn't know that he was having fun." "Thank you, M.A., but I think I had better go to the International. Maybe you could come and pick me up for dinner." "Yes, certainly. What time?" 8-ish. "Oh, to give me time to wash and put my feet up for a few minutes." I was naturally beginning to fear that I was going to be left alone in an empty 7-bedroom mansion on a Saturday night. I thought my host had had clean forgotten our dinner appointment, but he hadn't. As soon as Mr. Kilo left, he said he could take me to the other place before going to the International, and he was sure Jane would bring me back. "Agnes, is she who must be obeyed?" he quoted. I wondered whether he would also quote Rider Haggard or whoever wrote those memorable words to Jane, but all he said was that something urgent had cropped up. Jane was naturally very disappointed. Still, she agreed with her characteristic eagerness to run me home at the end of the party, or get some other guests to do so. The dinner would have come into the category which Mrs. Nanga called 9 pence talk and 3 pence chop. But the talk wasn't bad. Jean started us all off nicely by declaring ecstatically that one of the most attractive things about Chief Nanga, apart from his handsomeness, was his unpredictability. If you ask him if he was coming to dinner, he says, I will try. Oh, sweet. How sweet, said a middle-aged woman, I think British, matching her words with the gentle sideways tilt of her head in my direction. I just love your pigeon. I will try. Jean continued. Jean continued, can mean a whole lot of things. It may mean that he won't come, like tonight, or that he might turn up with 3 other people. How intriguing, said the other woman again. And it was only then I began to suspect she was being sarcastic. Apart from Jean and me, there were 5 others in the room. The British woman and her husband, a middle-aged American Negro writing a book about our country, and a white American couple. Dinner was rice and groundnut stew with chicken. I found it altogether too heavy for me that time of the day, but the sweet was very good, perhaps on account of it being new to me. I don't remember what they called it. As for coffee, I never touch it at night unless I have reason for wanting to keep awake. At the university, we used to call it the academic nightcap. The talk, as I said, was very good. My closeness to the minister gave everything I had a heightened significance, and I don't know whether this happens to other people, but the knowledge that I am listening to attentively works in a sort of virtuous circle to improve the quality of what I say. For instance, when at a certain point in the conversation I turned on arts appreciation, I made what I still think as a most valid and timely conversation. One of our leading artists had just made an enormous wooden figure for a god for a public square in Bori. I had not seen it yet, but had read a lot about it. In fact, it had attracted so much attention that it soon became fashionable to say it was bad or un-African. The Englishman was now saying that it lacked something or the other. I was pleased the other day, he said, as I drove past it to see one very old woman in uncontrollable rage shaking her fist at the sculpture. Now, that's very interesting, said someone. Well, it's more than that, said the other. You see, this old woman, quite an illiterate pagan, who most probably worshipped this very God herself, unlike your friend, trained in European art school. This old lady is in a position to know. Quite. It was when I had my flash of insight. Did you say she was talking? Did you say she was shaking her fist? I asked. In that case, you got her meaning all wrong. Shaking the fist in a society is a sign of great honor and respect. It means that you attribute power to the person or object. Much of the course is quite true, which of course is quite true. And if I may digress, I have, since this incident, come up against another critic who committed a crime in my view, because he transferred to an alien culture the same meaning and interpretation that his own people attach to certain gestures and facial expression. This critic, a Frenchman, writing in a classy, this critic, A Frenchman writing in a glossy magazine on art, on African art, said of a famous religious mask from his country. Note the half-closed eye, sharply drawn and tense eyebrow, the ecstatic and passionate youth. It was simply mouth. It was simply scandalous. All that the mask said, all that it felt for mankind, was a certain proverb, superb divine detachment and disdain. If I met a woman in the street and she looked at me with the face of that mask, that would be its meaning. But to return to the dinner party, having demolished the art pundit, I felt my reputation soar. I became more than just someone spending his holidays with Minister of Culture. The white American couple, especially the wife, practically hung on my every word. They wanted to know whether I had trained in Britain, what I had read at the university, what I taught at the Anata Grammar School, and had I been to the United States, what do I think of Americans? But the best story of that evening came from the Negro writer. He told us how a white American had once come up to his lunch table at the International Hotel, which, as everyone knows, is a kind of international mart for sale to our people of all kinds of foreign ways, from ideologies to tractors. This white American came up and said, full of respect, "May I join you, sir?" "Sure," replied the other. "What do you think of the Peace Corps?" I've nothing against it. One of my daughters is there. "You American?" "Sure, I came over." I thought this was good. I could see the other person promptly excusing himself and searching other tables for authentic Americans. When dinner was over, the American Negro offered to drop me off and save Jean the trouble. But she wouldn't hear of it, much to my relief, I must say. She said she had promised the minister to deliver me personally safe and sound at his doorstep, and in any case, she wanted a bit of fresh air before turning in. And so the others left, almost in a bunch. I guess we'd better be going, said Jean, clasping her hand above her head and stretching. But we've hardly said a word to each other, I said. Jean went and put on a record, a long play. A long play, high life, and we began to dance. I must say she had learned to do the high life well, except that she, like many other foreign enthusiasts of African rhythm, she tended to overdo the waist wiggle. I don't say I found it unpleasant, quite the contrary. I only make a general point, which I think is interesting. It all goes back to what others have come to associate us with. And let it be said that we are not entirely blameless in this. I remember we were outraged at the university. To see a film of breast-throwing, hip-jerking young women, which a neighboring African state had made and was showing abroad as an African ballet. Jean probably saw it in America. But whatever the case, her present effort, though pleasing and suitable in the circumstances, was by no means good high life, which in essence might carry the same message, but not in this heavy, subtle, altogether unsophisticated way. While we danced, I had a quick lesson in psychology. Apparently, Jean had noticed while we talked after dinner that I was shaking my legs, which meant that I wanted so badly to go to bed with some woman. Was it me or Elsie you wanted? Elsie? Yes, the American couple. Elsie Jackson. Elsie Jackson. Oh, I see. No, it wasn't her at all. Good Lord. No, it wasn't you, which was true. Actually, the leg shaking business was entirely news to me. The interpretation of it, I mean. As far as I could remember, I had always done it. And when I was a boy, Mama used to rebuke me for catching epilepsy. I don't remember whether we danced more than one number on the LP. I very much doubt it. What I remember clearly was the sudden ringing of the bedside telephone. If someone had tiptoed up the stairs in the dark and stuck a knife in my back, it couldn't have hit me more. Don't move, commanded Jean, bracing me firmly from below with a surprisingly strong pair of arms. I obey. Then with me and all on her, she began to wriggle on her back towards the telephone. She picked up the receiver and called her name. Had she just taken Holy Communion? And been returning to her pew? Her manner couldn't have appeared more calm and relaxed. Hi, Elsie. No, you are welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I got him home all right. I was just getting back. She replaced and put all her suppressed anger in calling Elsie a bitch, at which we both convulsed with laughter. All she wants to know is if you are still here. Do you think she knows? I don't think so, and don't care. Later, much later, we went down, hand in hand, to the kitchen for Jean to make coffee. I didn't mind drinking it. Sex means much more to a woman than to a man, said Jean, reflectively stirring her coffee. Does it? Sure. It takes place inside her. The man uses a mere projection of himself. I see. I wish I could tell her to stop chattering, but I didn't know her enough. Yet, I don't mind people talking before or during it, but I do object most strongly to a postmortem. One should drink coffee silently, or smoke, or just sit, or if one must talk, then choose some unrelated subject. I think Jean sensed my feeling. She was such a clever woman. It was about 1:30 when I caught her trying to suppress a yawn. I think I had better be going. Sorry to take you out at this time of night. Don't be so British, she said, almost vehemently. I wondered what was so British about what I had just said, and why it should hurt her so much, but decided against pursuing the matter. As she looked for her car key, she asked if I must get back right away, or would I like to come with her for a short drive through the town. Boring at night is simply fascinating, she said. But aren't you tired? You bet I'm not. She certainly knew the city well, from the fresh-smelling modern waterfront to the stinking, maggoty interior. How long have you been in the country? I asked in undisguised admiration. 11 months, she said. If you like a place, it doesn't take very long to know it. We drove through the wide, well-lit street, bearing the names of our well-known politicians, and into obscure lanes named after some small fish, even insignificant city councillors. Jean apparently knew them all. John apparently knew them all. Even insignificant city councillors had their little streets. I remember one called Stephen Awando Street. Going through some of these back streets would have convinced me. Had I needed convincing that the city clerk's notice about pearls was indeed a life issue? I began to wonder whether Jean actually enjoyed driving through these places as she claimed she did, or whether she had some secret reason, like wanting me to feel ashamed about my country's capital, or I hardly knew her, but I could see she was that kind of person, a most complicated woman. We were now back in the pleasant high-class area. That row of 10 houses belongs to the Minister of Construction, she said. They are let to different embassies at $3,000 a year each. So what? I said within myself. Your accusation may be true, but you are not right to make it. Leave it to us, and don't contaminate our cause by espousing it. But that's another Chief Nanga. That is another Chief Nanga street. But that's another Chief Nanga street, I said aloud, pointing to my left. No, what we saw near the fountain was Chief Nanga Avenue, she said, and we both burst out laughing. Friends again. I'm not sure there isn't a road as well elsewhere, she said. I know there is a cycle. Then I promptly recoiled again. Who the hell did she think she was to laugh so righteously? Wasn't she more than enough in her own country to keep her laughing all her days, or crying if she preferred it? I have often wondered, she said, completely insensitive to my silenced resentment. Why don't they call some street after the most important names in your country's history, or past events like independence, as they do in South Africa, in France and other countries? Because this is not France, but Africa, I said with peevish defiance. She obviously thought I was being sarcastic and laughed again. But what I had said was another way of telling her to go to hell. Now I guessed I knew why she took so much delight in driving through our slums, so much have taken hundreds of photographs. She must have taken hundreds of photographs already to send home to her relations. And come to think of it, would she, lover of Africa that she is, would she be found near a black man in her own country? When do you expect John back? I asked, burning with anger. Wednesday. Why? I was wondering whether I could see you again. Do you want to? Sure. Why not? Let me call you tomorrow. Chapter 6. Anyone who has followed this story at all carefully may well be wondering what had become of the Elsie whom I said was one of my chief reasons for going to Bori. Well, the chief reason had not altered in the least. I had in fact written to her as soon as I arrived, and then paid her a visit at the hospital on the following Saturday morning. But she was still on night duty and had not woken up from sleep, against the rules of our hospital, to see me. So that first visit had to be very short. Actually, the reason I went at all was to confirm that she was coming to the house to spend the 2 free days she would earn after the night shift, and that she was bringing a friend of ours along for Chief Nanga, although we did not spell it out so crudely. In our country, a long American car driven by a white uniformed chauffeur and flying a ministerial flag flying a ministerial flag. Could pass through the eye of a needle. The hospital gate man had promptly levered up the iron bar and saluted. The elderly male nurse I beckoned to had sprinted forward with an agility that you would think had left him at least a decade ago. And as I said earlier, although it was against all the laws of the hospital, they had let me into the female nurses' quarters and woken up Elsie to see me. Although she was obviously very drowsy, her unconcealed pleasure tempted me very strongly to stay longer than was reasonable for or fair. Her sleeping head tie hooded her face almost down to the eyebrow and completely covered her ears. But despite this and the sleep-swollen eyes, she was as desirable as ever, and she was ready. She was ready. It was just like her to start rushing around looking for a soft drink and biscuit for me. I refused quite firmly. In fact, I was already on my feet when the other girl came in to greet me. She obviously did not feel as confident as Elsie about her looks and had taken time to touch up. I tried very hard but could not recollect her face at all, even though Elsie said she had introduced us at a university party. She was reasonably good looking, but in that pointed mandibular way that made me think of the talkative weaver bed. Yet she hardly said a word, and when I finally rose to go, she did not even go with us to the car outside. Strangely uncurious for one of our women, I thought. As Elsie and I walked to the car, I said humorously, I hope Chief Nanka won't ask for a swap. For what? She asked with a puzzled look. Then it occurred to me that she might never have heard that word. And so I explained and we laughed. I thought you meant the cottonwood we use in the theater, she said. And we laughed again. Then she remembered to add graciously that a swap would not be necessary, as her friend was the more beautiful of the two. If you are looking for flattery from me this afternoon, you won't get it, I said, stooping at the door, which the chauffeur had been holding open since I first emerged from the night nurse's dormitory. By the way, I said, backing out and straightening up again, I met an American lady called Elsie at a party the other day. Whenever her name was called, my mind went to you. Who tell am say na Elsie be him name? When you see him again, you tell him say him own Elsie na counterfeit. But oddly, you say na wow. How you know even reach but refinish? You don't begin miss another Elsie for party. Make you take am JJ. Relax, I said, imitating Jean. What is wrong in telling you I met your namesake at a party? Actually, I was pleased to see Elsie jealous. I meant to go on to say and add, and had in fact half opened my mouth to begin saying that she needn't worry, that the other Elsie was no patch on her. But I quickly changed my mind for tactical reasons. Instead, I said that if I wanted a second girlfriend, I would pick one with a different name, if only to avoid confusion. Now lie, she said, smiling her seductive, two-dimpled smile. The way I look you eye, I feel say na even 10 else is no fit belleful you. Nonsense, I said. I bid them take Elsie make juju for me. I asked, laughing. I know, she said. She shrugged. You're supposed to know, I said. The chauffeur dropped a very broad and rude hint at this point by shutting my door again. I chose to ignore him. What be the name of your friend, car? Say Cadillac. Ah, this not the famous Cadillac. I don't think say I don't see him before. She was full of girlish excitement. Na tough car. Ejejeje. You think say these people go another heaven after this? My sister, no, no. Anyway, my sister, I don't know. Anyway, make we follow them. Chop small for this wall. I opened the door myself. I wait, and she helped close it. I'll be here on Thursday then at 4. Run along now and sleep, darling. I sat back with a proprietary air unusual for me. She waved. She stood waving until we disappeared round the corner. That Thursday evening at 6, Minister was due to open the first ever book exhibition of works by local authors. I was specifically interested in it because I had ambitions to write a novel about the coming of the first white men to my district. He came back for lunch at around 2:30, clutching the speech they had prepared for him. Apparently, he had been so busy at the office that he didn't even have time to look at it at all. So I thought I was going to sit down now and quickly run through it. But no, he said. But no, he put the file away on top of a bookshelf and began to ask about our trip to the hospital. I hadn't realized till then, and perhaps Chief now himself didn't, that he was going with me. I hope they will be ready when we get there. Yes, I told Elsie that you had to be at this place. I hope they will be ready when we get there. Yes, I told Elsie you had to be at this other place at 6. Tell me something, Odile. How serious are you about this girl, Elsie? You mean about marriage? Good Lord, no, she is just a good time girl. Kabu, kabu, he said with a twinkle in his eye. Yes, sort of, I said. Although what I said about marriage was true enough, yet it was grossly unfair at this stage in my relationship with Elsie to call her simply a good time girl. I suppose what happened was that Chief, Nanga, and I, having already swapped many tales of conquest, I felt somewhat compelled to speak in derogatory terms about women in general. In fact, I had already told the story of my first meeting with Elsie without, however, identifying her. Naturally, Chief Nanga had 5 stories to every one of mine. The best, I thought, was about the young married woman who never took her brassiere off. It was not until after many encounters that Chief managed to extract from her that her husband, apparently a jealous man, had put some juju on her breast to scare her into faithfulness. His idea being presumably that she would not dare to expose that part of her to another man, much less other parts. What a fool, I said. And he was trying to be so clever. He fool past Gary, said Chief Nanga. Which person? Tell me na Bobby them they take do the thing. Nonsense. But that woman now, wow, I said, who put that kind of sense for his head? The woman, perhaps or decides Chief Nanga. Any person who tell you say woman no get sense, just they talk pure jargon. When woman no want do something, he go leave him. But make you no fool yourself, say he leave the thing because he no get sense for do him. How true, I thought. It had been a bit of a surprise to me when Chief Nanga had announced he was coming with me to the hospital. I couldn't very well advised him coldly to stay behind and read through his speech. But I had a strong suspicion he had forgotten all about it, and I felt it was only fair, it was only fair that I should remind him. I considered various approaches and then decided to use the one that seemed to me to conceal most satisfactorily the small element of my self-interest. I wish I could help in any way with checking your speech, I said, but I just cannot read in the moving car. Oh, that speech, he said. He said wearily, I shall finish it in 10 minutes. It is not important. If I had known, I should have asked my parliamentary secretary to go and represent me. Anyway, it's not bad. Talking is now in my blood, from teaching into politics. Oh, na so talk. Actually, I had no serious objection. I had no serious reason for wanting to go alone. It was true I had formed a pretty clear mental picture of how it was all going to be. It was all going to happen, as it were, under my command. But it didn't really matter, and certainly wouldn't hurt anyone. If it happened differently, for instance, it would have been rather nice sitting between the two girls at the back. Now I would probably sit with the chauffeur, or better, Elsie, and I would sit in front. There was enough space really, and leave the back to the minister to get acquainted with the other girl. As it happened, all my worry was wasted. The other girl, I don't know what I've done with that girl's name, couldn't come with us on account of a sudden illness. I was very disappointed and very angry, and a little angry, even though Elsie had sworn it was a genuine illness. Fortunately, Chief Nanga didn't seem to mind at all, which was already surprising for me, who had so many, for a man who had so many women already to make themselves available. I remember him announcing twice or thrice on our way back, with Elsie sitting between us, that he had an important cabinet meeting, which will probably last all night tomorrow, and that he must try and get some sleep tonight. At first, I thought he was just showing off to the girl, and then I decided it was his wicked way of saying that the coast was completely clear for us. So in my gratitude, I began to tell Elsie how little time he spared for himself and his family. If somebody want make you minister, said Chief Nanga, come into my support, make you no grill, make you no be good life. On easy lies the head that wears the crown, said Elsie. Now true, my sister, said the chief. I think I tell you, said Chief Nanga, they go open book exhibition for 6 today. I said, book exhibition? Asked Elsie. How do they do make that one again? My sister, make you they ask him for me. Oh. I be thinking that me one never hear what that kind of thing before. But they say me a minister of culture, and as such, I supposed to be there. And if he say no, let him be minister. No be minister, no be public football. So instead for me to sit down and rest for house like other people, I dey go knock grammar for this hot afternoon. You don't see this kind of trouble before? We all laughed, including the driver, whose face I could see in the mirror. We joked and laughed all the way back. In Chief Nanga's company, it was impossible to not to be merry. We were met outside the exhibition hall by the president of the Writers' Society, a fellow I used to know fairly well at the university. In those days, before he became a writer, he had since published his novel, The Song of the Black Bell. He had become quite different. I read an interview he gave to a particular magazine in which I came across, in which it came out that he had become a non-conformist, that he now designed his own clothes, judging by his appearance. I should say he was tailored. He also tailored them. He had on a white and blue squarish thing. I respected that in a country where writers were so few, they would all be known personally to the Minister of Culture. But it was clear Chief Nanga hadn't even heard the man's name before. He is the author of the Song of the Blackbird. I said, I see it, Chief Nanga, replied Chief Nanga, whose attention was clearly elsewhere. So your society includes musicians as well? He asked in one fleeting return of interest. But by the time Jalio said no, his attention had again strayed from us. Hello, Jalio, I said, stretching my hand to shake him. He, almost in commiseration, he replied hello and took my hand. But obviously, he did not remember my name and didn't seem to care particularly. I was very much hurt by this and immediately formed a poor opinion of him and his silly airs. He didn't tell me, Mr. Jalio, sir. Thank you, Mr. Jalio. Why didn't you tell me that you are expecting ambassadors at this function? His eyes were still ranging over the packed cars, some of them carrying diplomatic plate numbers. I'm sorry, sir, said Mr. Jalio, but and you came to chairman, and you come to chairman such an event like this. He accompanied the last two words with an upward movement of a scornful left finger, taking in the whole of Mr. Jalio's person. What part of the country are you from? I didn't know what to feel. If Jalio hadn't carried those pretentious airs and sympathies, would certainly have stayed with him. For now, I must confess, I was very pleased to see him deflated. Is that what you call your national dress in your place? Pursued Chief Nanga mercilessly. I dressed to please myself, sir, said the writer, becoming suddenly defiant. Let me tell you, said Chief Nanga, I am a softened but firm, in a softened and firm tone. If you want me to attend any of your functions, you must wear a proper dress. Either you wear a suit, or if you don't like it, you can wear our national costume. This is correct. That is correct protocol. It was getting quite embarrassing for me, especially when Chief Nanga mentioned a suit and turned to not approvingly in my direction. For much as I disliked Jalio's pretentious bizarre habit, I still did not care to be set up as a model for correct dressing. Then suddenly adopting a paternal and conciliatory tone, Chief Nanga reminded us young people that we were the leaders of tomorrow, and a gift. I don't care if you respect me or not, he said, but our people have a saying that if you respect today's kings, if you respect today's king, will respect you when your turn comes tomorrow. In spite of the inauspicious beginning of Mr. Jalio went ahead and said many flattering things about Chief Nanga, albeit with a clouded face. He said it was a fitting and appropriate tribute to his concern for African culture, a concern which was well known all over the world, that the university in faraway America was soon to honor him with a doctorate degree. Chief Nanga stood up magnificently and drew up the sleeves of his robes back to his shoulders with two deft movements of his arms. He did not plunge the right away. He prepared script, but first made a few remarks of his own. He turned away to thank the president of the Writers Association, looking him over for half a second, so that I was afraid it might revert to the subject of dress Fortunately, he did not. Just congratulated, he smiled indulgently and a little while widely, and said he was honored to be invited by Mr. Jalio. As you know, Mr. Jalio is the president of the Society of Ghana. Fortunately, this was mistaken for witticism. He said, as you know, Mr. Jalio is the president of this society, which has already done much to project the African personality. I believe Mr. Jalio himself has compiled a brilliant song called, what is it again? He asked Mr. Jalio. Fortunately, this was mistaken for witticism and was greeted with laughter. It was from her vivacious laughter that that I noticed Jean sitting in the row in front of Elsie and me. Her husband John was sitting beside her. I hadn't realized she was back. I whispered into Elsie's ears that was the woman who gave her the party. Said, is she the famous Elsie? She replied, no, her friend. So no be only one. Even she's smiling. Odi, the great. She often shortened my name to Odi. I didn't listen to Chief Nanga's speech. When Elsie and I were not whispering into each other's eyes, I was thinking about the night, or even about such irrelevant things as the dress of some of the people in the room. There was one man I noticed particularly. His robe were made with some expensive-looking European woolen material, which was not so very expensive these days. Which was not so very expensive these days, but what surprised me was that the tailor had retained the cloth's thin yellow border on which the manufacturer advertised in endless and clear black type wool, 100% wool made in England. In fact, the tailor had used this advertisement to ornamental advantage on both sleeves. I was struck once again by our people's endless resourcefulness, especially when it came to taste in clothes. I noticed that whenever the man hitched up his sleeves, which he did every 2 or 3 minutes, he did it very carefully so that the quality of his material might not be lost in the many rich folds of the clothes. Chapter 7. Chief Nanga was a born politician. He could get away with almost anything he said or did. And as long as men are swayed by their hearts and stomach, as long as men are swayed by their hearts and stomachs and not their heads, the chief Nangas of this world will continue to get away with anything. He had that rare gift of making people feel, even while he was saying harsh things to them, that they were not a drop of ill will, that there was not a drop of ill will in his entire frame. I remember the day he was telling his ministerial colleague over the phone in my presence that he distrusted our university people and that he would rather work with European. I know I was hearing terrible things, but somehow I couldn't bring to terms the man seriously. I couldn't bring myself to take the man seriously. He had been so open and kind to me, and not in the least distrustful. The greatest criticism a man like him seemed capable of evoking in our country was indulgent. Make you know me nam. Okay. This is, of course, a formidable weapon which is always guaranteed to save its wielder from the normal consequences of misconduct. as well as from the humiliation and embarrassment of ignorance. For how else could you account for the fact that the Minister of Culture announced in public that he had never heard of his country's most famous hotel, received applause, as indeed he received again when he prophesied that before long our great country would produce great writers like Shakespeare's, Dickens, Jane Austen, Bernard Shaw, and raising his eyes off the script Michael West and Dudley Stamp. At the end of the function, Mr. Jalio and the editor of the Daily Machete came forward to congratulate him. And to ask for copies of his speech. Chief Nanga produced 2 clean copies from his file, bent down at the table, and amended relevant portions in it in his own fair hand by the addition of 2 names to the list of famous English writers. I knew the editor already from a visit, and had paid the minister a few days. I knew the editor already from a visit he had paid the minister a few days earlier. A greasy-looking man, he had at first seemed uneasy about my presence in the room, and I had kept a sharp look out for the slightest hint from Chief Nanga to get up and leave them. But no hint was given. On the contrary, I felt he positively wanted to stay, so I stayed. Our visitor took a very long time to come to the point. Whatever it was, I could gather was that he had access to something which he was holding back in Chief Nanga's interest. But it was clear that the minister did not attach very much importance to whatever it was. In fact, he appeared to be sick and tired of the man, but dare not say so. Meanwhile, the journalist told us one story after another, a disgusting man foaming, a disgusting white foam appearing at the corners of his mouth. He drank 2 bottles of beer, smoked many cigarettes, and then got a dash of £5 from the minister after an account of his trouble with his landlord over arrears of rent. Apparently, it was not a straightforward case of debt, but the landlord and the journalist came from different tribes. The element of tribalism could not be ruled out. Now you see what it means to be a minister, said Chief Nanga as soon as his visitor left. His voice sounded strange. As soon as his voice sounded strangely tired, and I felt suddenly sorry for him. This was the nearest I had since nearest I had seen him come to despondency. If I don't give him something now, tomorrow I will go and write rubbish about me. Tomorrow he will go and write rubbish about me, then say it is the freedom of the press. But to me, it is nothing short of the freedom to crucify innocent men and assassinate their character. I don't know why our government is so afraid to deal with them. I don't say they should not criticize. After all, no one is perfect but God. But they should criticize constructively, so that other afternoon, when the journalist came forward to get a copy of the speech and shouted, "First rate, sir," I shall put it in the front page instead of a story I have promised the Minister of Construction. I just wondered if he ever suspected where he and his stories would be if Chief Nanga had his way. It must have been about 8 o'clock. It was certainly dark when we left the exhibition to drive back home. As soon as the car moved, I dovetailed my fingers into Elsie on her lap and threw the other arm across her shoulders in a bold proprietary gesture. That was a beautiful speech, and you didn't have much time to go over it, I said. Just go to get some talk going, while privately I stopped with expectation. An image that had never until then entered my mind appeared to me now. I saw Elsie, or rather didn't see her, as she emerged so completely with the darkness of my room, unlike Jean, who had remained half undissolved, like some apparition as she put her things in the room. When an old woman hears the dance, she knows her old age deserts, replies Chief Nanga in her language. I laughed more loudly than the proverb deserved, and then translated it for Elsie, who spoke a different language. We used the laughter to get a little easier, get a little closer, so that the arm I had over her shoulder slipped under her arm to her breast, and I pressed her against my side. When we got back, Chief Nanga and I had whiskey, while Elsie went upstairs to change. Incidentally, when on our first return from the hospital, Chief Nanga had told his servant to take Elsie's back to his absent wife's room. I had been greatly alarmed, but displaying great tact and delicacy, and I felt grateful. Just as I had done when he had told us of the all-night cabinet meeting. There was one short flight of stairs between the room on the floor. There was one short flight of stairs between the room on the floor and where Elsie was being installed. When all was silent, I would go up quietly, tap on her door, find her waiting, and take her downstairs to my room. And we could pretend that our host was none the wiser. We had an excellent dinner of rice, ripe plantain, and fresh fish. Elsie, looking ripe and ready in a shimmering yellow dress, took us back to the president of the Writers Association and his funny job. I found myself putting a feeble kind of defense. Writers and artists sometimes behave that way, I said. I think he will need my advice, said Chief Nanga. He is a well-comported young man. This surprised me a great deal. I suppose it was Jalio's flattering words in introducing the minister that did so. Or more likely, Chief Nanga had now missed the almost differential manner in which one of the ambassadors had approached Jalio with a copy of his book for autograph. I remember looking at Chief Nanga then and seeing astonishment, belief, and unbelief on his face. But I think I do not think it is enough to persuade him to call Jalio a well-comported young man. Words well-comported struck me almost forcibly, and I sensibly conveyed, and as the sentiment they conveyed, I couldn't say whether it was right or wrong, or in any case, you felt once again that such distinction didn't apply here. Chief Nanga was one of the fortunate ones who had just enough English and not one single word to have his say strongly without inhibition. I remember his telling me of a fatal accident he once had during his driving from Anata to Bori. Since he was alive, I had assumed that someone else had been killed. But as the story unfolded, I realized the fatal accident was no more than very serious. I retired soon after dinner so that the others might take the cue. Elsie did. The second time I peeped out, she was no longer there in the sitting room, but Chief Nanga sat on the solid looking on the solid, but Chief Nanga sat on stolidly, looking at the file of the speech he had already presented. Every 2 minutes or so, I came to the parlor. Every 2 minutes or so, I came to the door and peeped out, and there he was. Could he sleep? Could he be asleep? No. His eyes seemed to be moving across the page. I was getting angry. Why didn't he take the blessed file to his study? But perhaps what hurt me most was the fact that I could not muster up sufficient bravado to get up to the sitting room and up the room. Perhaps even expected me to do so. Let me say that I do not normally lack resolution in this kind of situation, but Chief Nanga had, as it were, cramped my style from the very first introduction, an element of delicacy into the affair, thus making it not such a question of my own resolution as of my own willingness to parade Elsie before a third person as a common slut. So there was nothing for it but wait it in anger. I sat on my bed, got up again, and paced my room barefoot in pajamas. It seemed a full hour before Chief Nanga finally switched the light off and turned in. I gave him about 5 minutes to 5 minutes to settle down in his bed, while I had time to steady myself from the strain of the last hour and the unsettling effect which eminent fulfillment always has on me. Then I began to tiptoe upstairs, running my palms on the wooden railing for guidance. By the time I got to the landing area, were fairly at home in the darkness, and it was easy finding Elsie's door. My hand was already on the knob when I heard voices inside. I was transfixed to the spot. Then I heard laughter and immediately turned round and went down the stairs again. I did not go into the room straight, but stood there for long minutes in the sitting room. What went on in my mind at that time lacked form. I cannot now set it down, but I remember finally deciding that I was jumping to conclusion that Chief Nanga had, in all probability, simply opened the door and opened the connecting door between the two rooms to say good night and exchange pleasantries. I decided to give him a minute or two, and then discarding this pussy-footed business, to go up boldly and knock on Elsie's door. I went back to my room, switched on the bedside lamp, which was worked by very short silvery rope instead of a normal switch, looked at my watch, which I had taken off, and put on a bedside stool. It was already past 10:30. It was already past 10:30. This turned me into activity again. I hadn't enough. It was so late. I rushed into the sitting room and made to bound up the stairs when I heard, as from a distance, Elsie deliriously screaming my name. I find it difficult in retrospect to understand my inactions at that moment. A sort of paralysis had spread over my limbs, while an intense pressure was building up inside my chest. But before I reached raging point, I felt it siphoned off, leaving me empty inside and out. I trudged up the stairs in the incredible delusion that Elsie was calling on me to come and save her from her ravisher. But when I got to the door, a strong revulsion and hatred swept over me. I turned sharply away and went down the stairs for the last time. I sat on my bed I sat on my bed and tried to think with my head in my hands, but a huge sledgehammer was beating down on my brain as on an anvil, and my thought was scattering sparks. I soon realized that what was needed was action. Quick, sharp action. I rose to my feet and wheeled myself about, gathering my things into the suitcase. I had no clear idea what I would do next, but for the moment that did not trouble me. The present loomed so large. I brought down my clothes one at a time from the wardrobe. I folded them, packed them neatly. Then I brought my things from the bathroom and put them away. These simple operations must have taken me a long time to complete. In all that time, I did not think anything particularly. I was just bit my lower lips, and it was sore. Occasionally, words like "good heavens" escaped me and came out loud. When I finished packing, I slumped down on the chair and then got up again, and then went into the sitting room to see if the sounds were still coming. But all was now dark and quiet upstairs. I remember saying, my word, when I went to wait for Elsie, for I knew she would come down, shedding tears of shame, and I would kick her out and bang the door after her. I waited and waited, and then, strange as it may sound, I dozed off. When I started awake, I had that dull, heavy terror of knowing that something terrible had happened without immediately remembering what it was. Of course, the uncertainty lasted only 1 second or less. Recollection and panic followed soon enough, and then the humiliating wound came alive again and began to burn more fresh than when first inflicted. My watch said a few minutes past 4, and Elsie had not come. My eyes misted. A thing that had not happened to me in God knows how long. Anyways, the tears hung back. I took off my pajamas, got into my clothes, and then left the room by the private door. I walked for hours. I kept on the street. I strode this wildly street. The dew settled on the head and helped to numb the feeling. Soon my nose began to run, and I hadn't brought a handkerchief. I blew it into the roadside drain by closing each nostril in turn with my first finger. As soon as my nose began to clear, As soon as my head began to clear a little, I saw Bo retiring. I met a nice old man carrying his bucket of ardor on top of a battered felt hat drawn down to cover his upper face, while his nose and mouth were masked with a piece of black cloth like a gangster. I saw beggars sleeping under the eaves of luxurious department stores, and a lunatic man sitting wide awake by a basket of garbage he called his property. The first buses running empty past me, and I watched the street lights go off finally around 6. I drank in all these details with the early morning air. It was very strange, perhaps, that a man who had so much on his mind should find time to pay attention to these small, inconsequential things. It was like a man in the prophet, who was carrying the carcass of an elephant on his head, and and searching with his toe for a grasshopper. But that was how it happened. It seemed that no thought, no matter how great, had the power to exclude all others. As I walked back to the house, I tried in vain to find the kind of words I needed to speak to Chief Nanga. As for Elsie, I should have known that she was a common harlot, and the less said about her, the better. Chief Nanga was outside his gates, apparently looking out for me. I came around the last bend. He happened just then to be looking in the opposite direction, and did not see me at once. My first reaction on seeing him was to turn back. Fortunately, I did not give in to what kind of panic. In any case, he turned round and just then saw me and began to come towards me. "Where have you been now, Odili?" he asked. I been looking for you. I nearly phoned 999. "Please don't talk to me again," I said. "What?" "Wonders will never end." "What is wrong, Odili?" "I don't want to talk." I said, "Don't talk to me again," I replied, as coolly as possible. "Wonders will never end. Is it about the girl? But you told me you are not serious with her." "I asked you because I don't like misunderstanding, and I thought you were tired and had gone to sleep." "Look here, Mr. Nanga, respect yourself. Don't provoke me anymore unless you want our names to come out in the newspaper tomorrow." Even to myself, I sounded strange. Chief Nanga was really taken aback, especially when I called him Mister. "You have won today," I answered, "but watch it. I will have the last laugh. I never forget. Elsie was standing at the door with arms folded. Across her bust. When I came in at the gate, she immediately rushed indoors and disappeared. When I brought out my suitcase, Chief Nanga, who had not said another word since I insulted him, came back and tried to put a hand on my shoulder in one last effort at reconciliation. Don't be childish, Odili," he said paternally. "After all, she is not your wife. What is all this nonsense? She told me there is nothing between you and she, and you told me the same thing. But anyway, I'm sorry if you are offended. The mistake is mine. I tender unreserved apology. If you like, I can bring you 6 girls this evening. You go do the thing so you go back, say you no want again." "Ha ha 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 ha. What a country," I said. "You call yourself Minister of Culture. God bless you." And I spat, not a full speed, but a token, albeit unmistakably. "Look here, Odili." He turned on me then like an incensed leopard. "I will not stomach any nonsense from any small boy for the sake of a common woman. Yeah? If you insult me again, I will show you Pepe. Young people of today are very ungrateful. Imagine. Anyways, don't insult me again, no. Don't insult me again. No. You can't do fuck. I said. You are just a bush." I cut myself short and walked out, lumbering my suitcase past Dogo, the one-eyed stalwart, who had presumably heard our voices and come out from the boys' quarters in his sleeping loincloth. investigate. Now this boy, the holler so for master in face. I heard him ask, "Don't mind the stupid idiot, Chief Nanga," said Chief Nanga. "You know, feed insult master like that. No feed insult master like that here. Come out free. Oh. Hey, my friend," I shouted, coming after me. He shouted, coming after me, "Are you there?" His voice was full of menace. "Leave him, dogo. Make he carry him bad luck, they go. Nah, my own mistake for bring him here, ungrateful idiot." It was now at the gate, but I was now at the gate, but his voice was loud and I heard every word. I took a taxi to my friend Maxwell's address, Maxwell's Colamo. I took a taxi to Maxwell's to my friend Maxwell's address. Maxwell Colamo, a lawyer, had been my classmate at the grammar school. We called him Cool Max or Cool Max. And his and his best friend saved it. So he was the poet's literature. We called him Cool Max or Cool Max in those days, and his best friend still did. He was a poet laureate of our school. And I still remember the famous closing couplet of the poem he wrote when our school beat our rival. "Hooray to our inconquerable fullbacks." The writer, "Hooray to our inconquerable fullbacks." He was already fully dressed for court, striped trousers and black coat, and was eating breakfast when I arrived a few minutes. I spoke to Nanga and the fairly long taxi ride had combined to make it possible for me to wear a passable face. "Good gracious," Max shouted, shaking my hands violently. Shaking my hand violently. "Diligent, now your eye be this." Diligent was a version of Odile I had born at school. "Cool Max," I greeted him. In return, the writer of these lines. We laughed, and the tears I had not shed last night came to my eyes. Max suspected nothing, and even thought I was just coming from home. I told him rather shamefacedly that I had been in town for the past few days, but hadn't found it possible to contact him. He took this. This is to be a reference. This is to be a reference. This to be a reference to his having to his having no telephone in the house, a fact which in turn could be a reflection on his practice. "I have been on the waiting list for a telephone for 2 months, he said defensively. "You see, I have not given anyone a bribe, and I don't know any big gun. So you have been staying with that corrupt, empty-headed, illiterate capitalist. Sorry, yo. No matter of can't help," I said. "He na my old teacher, you know." I was dipping my bread in the cup of hot cocoa drink Max's boy had made for me. Chief Nanga and Elsie already seemed so distant that I could have talked about them like casual acquaintances, but I was not going to delay Max by talking now. And in any case, I had no wish to make him think that I only remembered him when I could no longer enjoy the flesh pots of Chief Nanga's home. Within minutes, I was already feeling so relaxed and at ease here that I wondered what piece of ill fate took me to Chief Nanga in the first place. Chapter 8. It was only after Max had left for court at around 9 that I finally felt the full weight of the previous night's humiliation settling down on me. The heat and anger had now largely evaporated, leaving the cold fact that another man had wrenched my girlfriend from my hand and led her to bed under my very eyes. And I had done nothing about it, could do nothing. And why? Because the man was a minister, bloated by the flatulence of ill-gotten wealth, living in a big mansion built with public money, riding a Cadillac and watched over by a one-eyed hired dog. And as though that were not enough, he had the obscene effrontery to say he thought I was too tired. A man of 50 or more with a son in a secondary school and a wife whose dress gets caught between the buttocks thought I was tired. And here was I, doing nothing about it except speculating whether Elsie would get back to her hospital that day or spend another night with Chief Nanga. By late afternoon, I even had the crazy preposterous idea of wanting to go to a public telephone to put through an anonymous call. Of course, I killed the disgraceful thought right away. But I suppose it was possible, judging by the way things finally worked themselves out, that this weak and trivial thought might have been a sort of smokescreen behind which, unknown to me, weighty decisions were taking place. It was perhaps like the theory of writing examinations that one of my lecturers used to propound to us. He said the right technique was to read all the questions once through, select those you wanted to answer, and then start answering. And start with the easiest. His theory being that while you were answering the easy number, your subconscious would set you to work, arranging the other ones for you. I tried it out for my degree examination, and although the result was not exactly startling, I suppose it could have been worse. But on the present question of Chief Nanga, my subconscious, or something very much like it, seemed to have gone voluntarily into operation. I was just flapping about like a trapped bird when suddenly I saw the opening. I saw that Elsie did not matter in the least. What mattered was that a man had treated me as no man and had a right to be treated. The man had treated me as no man had a right to treat another, not even if he was master and the other slave, and my man would require that I make him pay for his insult in full measure. In flesh and blood terms, I realized I must go back, seek out Nanga's intended parlor wife, and give her the works, good and proper. All this flashed through my mind in one brief moment of blinding insight. Just like that, without warning. I was singing happily when Max came home in the late afternoon. He tried to be furious with his houseboy for not giving me my share of the lunch when it was ready. But I went straight to the boy's defense and said he had offered me, but that I insisted on waiting, which was quite untrue. As I ate, I told Max about Elsie and Chief Nanga, amending the story in several minor particulars and generally making light of it. Not only because I was anxious to play down my humiliation, but even more because I no longer cared for anything except the revenge. If you put juju on a woman, it will catch that old rotten man, said Max, after I had told the story. I know someone who did, I said lightheartedly, but the old rotter was caught. I then told him the story of the old woman who didn't take off her bra, thinking it would amuse him. I was wrong. That's all they care for, he said, with a solemn face. Women, cars, landed property, but what else can you expect? When intelligent people have leave politics to illiterates like Chief Nanga, the appearances of comparative peace which Max's house presented to me that morning proved quite deceptive. Or perhaps some of Chief Nanga's queen bee characteristics had rubbed off on me and transformed me into an independent nucleus of activity which I trailed with me into this new place. The first night, I not only heard of a new political party about to be born, but got myself enrolled in a foundation as a foundation member. And some sort of his friends, having watched the deepening delusion they used to wish our hard-won freedom was being put by corrupt, mediocre politicians, and decided to come together and launch the Common People's Congress. There were 8 young people in the room that evening. All but one were citizens of our country, mostly professional types. The only lady there was a very beautiful lawyer who I learned afterwards was engaged to Max, whom she had just met in the London School of Economics. There was a trade unionist, a doctor, another lawyer, a teacher, and a newspaper columnist. Max introduced me without any previous consultation as a trustworthy comrade who had only the other day had his girlfriend snatched from him by a minister who shall remain nameless. Naturally, I did not care for that kind of image or reputation, so I promptly intervened to point out that the woman in question was not strictly speaking my girlfriend, but a close acquaintance, whom both Chief Nanga and I knew. So it was Chief Nanga, yes, said the European, and everyone burst out laughing. Who else could it be? Said one of the others. The man was apparently from one of the Eastern Bloc countries. He did not neglect to stress to me in an aside that he was there only as a friend of Max. He told me a lot of things quietly while the others were discussing some obscure details about the launching. I was as much interested in what he said as the way he said it. His English had an exotic quality occasionally, as when he said that he was going to see intellectuals like Marx, myself, and the rest coming out of their tower of elephant talks into active politics. And then he often punctuated whatever he was saying with yes, spoken with the accent of a question. Yes. I must say that I was immediately taken with the idea of the Common People's Convention. Apart from everything else, it will add a second string to my bow when I came to deal with Chief Nanga. But right now, I was anxious not to appear to Mas and his friends as the easily impressed type. I suppose I wanted to erase whatever impression was left of Max's unfortunate, if unintentional presentation of me as a kind of pitiable jellyfish. So I made what I intended to be a little spirited, skeptical speech. It is very kind of you, gentlemen and lady. I say gentlemen and lady advisedly because this happens to be Africa. It is very kind of you to accept me so readily. I wish to assure you all that your confidence will be fully justified. But without trying to put a cat among your pigeons, I must say that I find it somewhat odd that a party calling itself the Common People's Convention should be made up of only professional men and women. I was interrupted by many voices at once, but the rest gave way to Max. This is not entirely accurate. That is not entirely accurate, Odili. What you see here is only the vanguard, the planning stage. Once we are ready, we draw in the workers, the farmers, the blacksmith, the carpenter, and the unemployed, of course, said the young lady, with that confidence of a beautiful woman who has brains as well, which I find very intimidating. And I'd like to take our friend up on a purely historical point. The great revolutions of history were started by intellectuals, not by common people. Karl Marx was not a common man. He wasn't even a Russian. The trade unionists applauded the speech by clapping and shouting, "Hey, yeah." The rest made different kinds of appreciative noises. Well, I thought, and gave up altogether my next idea of asking how the thing was going to be financed. At the same time, said Marx, acting the perfect chairman. I can't say that I blame Odili for making that point. For making that point. He's always been a sticker for thoroughness. Do you know his name? You know the name we called him at school? Diligent. Everyone laughed. I should add that he was called Cool Max. I said, he always played it cool. And still does, said the lady with a wink at him. I beg your pardon, protested Max playfully. Anyhow, lady and gentlemen, or rather gentlemen and lady, to borrow your friend's fine example, Max protested the girl in mock outrage. Well, I never. I think to save all the difficulty, yes, we should simply say comrades, suggested the European, laughing nervously, which made me think he wasn't joking like the rest of us. Hey, said the trade unionist. Yes, said Max coolly, except that, as I said several times before, I don't want anybody to say we are communists. We can't afford the label. It will simply finish us. Our opponent will point at us and say, look at those crazy people who want to have everything in common, including their wives. And that would end it. That's the plain fact. I don't know about that, said the trade unionist. I think our trouble in this country is that we are too nervous. We say we are neutral, but as soon as we hear communists, we begin to shake and peace for trouser. Excuse me, he said to the lady, and dropped the pigeon as suddenly as he had slid into it. The other day, somebody asked me why did I go to Russia last January. I told him it was because of you. It was because if you look only in one direction, your neck will become stiff. We all laughed loud, especially the European. I know, Joe, began Max, but Joe did not yield easily. No, excuse me, Max, he said. I'm serious. We are either independent in this country or we are not. We are not, said Max, and everyone laughed again, including Joe this time. All the heat apparently siphoned off him. I was struck by Max's cool, sure touch. He was clearly in control of the situation, and he seemed to me to have just the right mixture of faith and down-to-earth practical common sense. We will not win the next election, he told me, on another occasion. In itself, we will not win the next election, he told me on another occasion. In itself, it was a fairly obvious statement. But how many mushroom political parties had we seen spring up, prophesy a landslide victory for themselves, and then shrivel up again? What we must do is get something running, said Marx, however small, and wait for the blow up, which is bound to come. I don't know how or when, but it's got to come. You simply cannot have this stagnation and corruption going on indefinitely. How do you propose getting the money? Well, we will get some, he smiled, enough to finance ordinary election expenses. We will leave mass bribing of the electors to POP and PAP. We will simply drop cats among their pigeons here and there. Stand aside and watch. I am right now assembling all their documentary evidence. All the documentary evidence I can find of corruption in high places. Brother, it will make you weep, I am sure. Because I had asked him jokingly as we were about to retire to bed if he still wrote poetry. Marx had gone and fished out lines. He wrote 7 years ago to the music of a famous high life. He wrote it during the intoxicating months of high hopes, soon after independence. Now he sang it like a dirge, and believe me, tears welled up at the back of my eyes, tears for the dead infant hope. You may call me sentimental if you like. I have the poem, Dance Offering to the Earth Mother, right here before me as I write, and couldn't quote the whole of it. But I could never convey in print the tragic feeling I had that evening as Marx sang it, tapping his foot to the high life rhythm, and bringing back vividly the gaiety and high promise of 7 years ago, which now seemed more than 7 lifetimes. Said, I will return home to her. Many centuries have I wandered, and I will make my offspring at the feet of my lovely mother. I will rebuild her house, the holy places they raped and plundered, and I will make it fine with black wood, bronzes, and terracotta. I read this last verse over and over again. Poor black mother, waiting so long for her infant son to come of age and comfort her and repay her for the years of shame and neglect. And the son she has pinned so much hope on turning out to be a chief Nanga. Poor mother, I said aloud. Yes, poor mother said, poor black mother, said Max, looking out of the window. After a long interval, he turned round and asked if I remembered my Bible. Not really. Why? Well, I can't get it out of my system. You know, my father is an Anglican priest. No, when you talked about Bible, when you talked about poor black mother just now, I remember a passage that goes something like this. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children, and she would not be comforted because they are not. It is a favorite of my father's, who by the way still thinks we should never have asked the white man to go. Perhaps he is right. Well, no. The trouble is that he hasn't got very much out of independence, personally. There simply aren't any white posts in this profession that he could take over there. There is only one bishop in the entire diocese, and he is already an African. You are unfair to the old man, I said, laughing. You should hear some of the things the old man says about me. I remember when I last went to see him with Eunice, he said, who knows, I might get a son before him. Oh, we crack such expensive jokes. You are my only son, aren't you? Yes. I felt so envious. You know, Odili, he began suddenly after a longish pause. I don't believe in providence and all that kind of stuff, but your arrival just at this very moment is most fortunate. You see, we were planning to appoint able and dynamic organizing secretaries in each of the regions where in each of the regions very soon. Now we've got you. We don't have to worry our head about the southeast anymore. I'll do what I can, Max, I said. Perhaps the most astonishing thing Max told me about the new party was that one of the junior ministers in the government was behind it. What is he doing in the government if he is so dissatisfied with it? I asked naively. Why doesn't he resign? Resign? Laughed Max. Where do you think you are? Britain or something? Don't be funny, Odili. I'm not funny, not being funny, I said hotly. Perhaps more hotly than was called for. I said hotly, perhaps more hotly than was called for. I knew very well and needed no reminder that we were not in Britain or something. That when a man resigned in our country, it was invariably with an eye on the main chance, or as when a few years ago, 10 newly elected PAP members of parliament had switched parties at the opening of the session and given the POP a comfortable majority overnight. In return for ministerial appointment. And if one believe the rumor, a little cash prize each as well. All that was well known, but I would have thought it was better to start a new party clean with a different kind of philosophy. I know how you feel, said Max, rather patronizingly. I feel like that at first. But we must face certain facts. You take a man like Nanga now on a salary of 400 plus. All the, you know what his salary was as an elementary school teacher. Perhaps not more than £8 a month. Now, do you expect a man like that to resign on a little matter of principle, assuming that he can recognize principle when he sees it? I added somewhat pompously. Well, exactly. I am not saying. Mark you that our man is like Nanga, is a true nationalist and would not hesitate to resign if he felt it was really necessary. But as he himself points out, though we commit suicide every day, we feel unhappy and with the state of the world. It's hardly the same thing, I said. Well, I know, but having a man like him right in the government is very essential. I can assure you, he tells me all that goes on. In that sense, I suppose you are right. As the saying goes, it is only when you are close to a man that you can begin to smell his breath. Chapter 9. I returned to Anata on 23rd December after Max and his fiancée Eunice had tried in vain to make me spend Christmas in Bori. The lorry dropped me at the small roadside market called Waya, which had sprung up to serve the grammar school. Something unusual seemed to be going on in Josiah's shop and bar. Whatever it was had drawn crowds from the rest of the market to it. You couldn't say definitely at first whether it was a good thing or a bad from the loud, excited talking, but it was soon very clear from the kind of gesticulation I saw that something had gone wrong. I saw one old woman swing her hand in a gyre around her head and jerk it towards Josiah's shop. A most ominous sign. "Teacher," said one villager who had spotted me and was coming to shake hands. I didn't know him by name. "Are you back already? Let me carry your box. I hope your people are well." We shook hands and I told him that my home people were well when I left them. Then I asked him what was going on there at the shop. "What else could it be but Josiah?" he said, taking up my box and placing it on his head. He said that what the white man's money will bring about has not shown itself yet. "You know Azoge, the blind beggar?" "Yes, the blind beggar." "Josiah is not touched by Azoge. He's not touched by Azoge's ill fortune, and he is not satisfied with all the thieving he does here in the name of trade, but must now make juju with Azoge's stick." At this point, he turned aside to greet another villager, and they both shook hands, and they both shook their heads over the abomination. "I don't understand," I said, when we resumed our conversation. "Josiah called Azoge to his shop and gave him rice to eat and plenty palm wine. Azoge thought he had met a kind man and began to eat and drink. While he was eating and drinking, Josiah took away his stick." Have you ever heard such abomination? "And put a new stick like the old one in its place, thinking that Azoge would not notice. But if a blind man does not know his own stick, tell me what else would he know?" So when Azoge prepared to go, he reached for his stick and found that a strange one was in its place, and so he began to shout. "I still don't understand. What does Josiah want to do with his stick?" "How are you asking such a question, teacher?" "To make medicine for trade, of course." "That is possible," I said, still very much in the dark, but not caring to make it known. What money will do in this land wears a hat. I have said it. When we got to my house, I gave him 1 shilling, and he thanked me, gave a few more helpful details of the incident, and went to rejoin the crowd. I would have gone there too, but was tired from my journey, and in any case, my mind was on other things. I meant to rest a little, have a wash, and go in search of Mrs. Nanga, but the noise outside was getting louder and louder, and in the end, I had to go out to see. Josiah had apparently barricaded himself inside his shop, from where no doubt he could hear the crowd outside pronouncing deadly curses on him and his trade. The blind man, Azoge, was there, still telling his story over and over again. I walked from one little group to another, listening. So the beast is not satisfied with all the money he has The beast is not satisfied with all the money he takes from us, and must now make a medicine to turn us into kind blind buyers of his ware, said one old woman. May he blind his mother and his father, not me, circled her head with her right hand and cast the evil towards the shop. Some people's belly is like the earth. It is never so full that it will not take another corpse. God forbid, said a palm wine tapper. I believe he was one of those who supplied Josiah with the wine he retailed in beer bottles. Start. Okay, so the beast is not satisfied. So Josiah had apparently barricaded himself inside his shop, from where we've got it. We've read that already. Some people's belly is like the earth. It is never so full that it will not take another corpse. God forbid, said a palm wine tapper. I believe he was one of those who supplied Josiah with the wine he retailed in bottles. But the most ominous thing I heard was Timothy, the middle-aged man, who was a kind of Christian and a carpenter. Josiah was taken away enough for the owner to notice. He said again and again, "If anyone ever sees my feet in this shop again, let him cut them off." Josiah has now removed enough for the owner to see him. I thought much about that proverb. I thought much afterwards about that proverbs, about the man taking things away until the owner at last notices. In the mouth of our people, there was no greater condemnation. It was not just a simple question of a man's cup being full. A man's cup might be full and none be the wiser. But here, the owner knew, and the owner, I discovered, is the will of the whole people. Within 1 week, Josiah was ruined. A man, woman, or children went near his shop. No man, woman, or children or child went too near his shop. Even strangers and mommy wagon passengers, making but a brief stop at the market, were promptly warned off. Before the month was out, the shop and total bag closed for good, and Josiah disappeared for a while. But to return to the day I came back from Bori, I hired a bicycle in the evening, and the repairer in the market, and went. I hired a bicycle in the evening from the repairer in the market and went to see Mrs. Nanga. I had to see her before the story of my quarrel with her husband got to Anata and ruined my chances of reaching Edna. The intended parlor wife, not that I thought Chief Nanga himself would want to transmit it, although there were no knowing what he might or might not do. But there were many others in Bori who might send it on for want of better news. She was surprised to see me, but I had a convincing explanation ready. Sudden change of plans and the kind of things her children came and shook hands. The village, I noticed, had already rubbed off a good deal of their Bori freshness and made the Corona school English a little incongruous. Go and get a drink for the said Mrs. Nanga. Go and get a drink for the said Mrs. Nanga to her eldest son, Eddie, the one at secondary school. He soon brought me a bottle of ice-cold beer, which was just the thing after my strenuous ride. I poured the first glass down my throat. In one go, and then began to sip the second as I did, so I kept wondering how I broached the question of Edna without appearing too suspicious. When are you preparing to return to Bori? I asked. The house is quite cold without you. The house is quite cold without you and the children. Don't tell me about Bori, my brother. I want to rest a bit here. Eddie's father said I should come back at the end of next month before he goes to America. But I don't know. I thought you were going with him. Me? He said, yes, why not? My brother, when those standing have not got their share, you are talking about those kneeling. Have you ever heard of a woman going to America when she doesn't know ABC? Fine, I thought. She was about to plunge in. Fine, I thought, and was about to plunge in, but Mrs. Nanga blushed me even more. Even Edna comes, she will go to other places. When Edna comes, she will go to those places. She said, I am too old and too bush. Who is Edna? Don't you know about Edna, our new wife? Oh, that girl? Nonsense. She doesn't know half as much book as you. Ah, she does. She does so. I know go modern school. But standard 6 in your time was superior. Oh, was superior to senior Cambridge today. I said in my language, refusing to be drawn into the longevity of the levity of pidgin. You talk as though I went to school in 19 Creedom, she said, somewhat hot. No, I said, but education has been failing every year. Last year's standard 6 is higher than this year's, but she didn't seem to be all that hot about after all. Her mind appeared to be far away on other thoughts. I passed the entrance to a secondary school, she said wistfully. But Eddie's father and his family kept at me to marry him, and then my own parents joined in that. They said, what did a girl want with so much education? So, foolishly agreed. I wasn't old enough to refuse. Edna is falling into the same trap. Imagine a girl straight from college, not being allowed to teach even for 1 year, and look around. Anyway, what is my share in it? Let her come quick. My first reaction was to feel uncomfortable, not so much for what Mrs. Tanga had said, as was by the not so much for what Mrs. Nanga had said, as by the presence, while she said it, of her 15-year-old son Eddie. Is she coming into the house? I don't know. What is my own here? She can come tomorrow. As far as I am concerned, the house is here, and she can take over from me and stay awake all night to talk grammar. And in the morning, her dress will be smelling of cigarette smoke and white people. I can't help laughing. Why don't you want to advise her? She said. She should take at least 1 year and teach and look around. She will listen to you, I am sure. She is only a little girl, really. True, she was born yesterday. Let her come and suck. She indicated her left breast. No, my brother, I won't spoil anybody good fortune. I won't spoil anybody's good fortune When Eddie's father married me, I was not half her age. As soon as her mother recovers, let her come and eat Nanga's wealth. The food is cooked, and the smell of the food is the smell of the soup is around. Let nobody remember the woman who toiled and starved when there was no money. She rubbed her eyes with a corner of her wrapper and blew her nose with it. Where is her home? I must go and talk to her tomorrow morning. I understand. I must. Before I said this, I considered Eddie's presence, but quickly took the calculated risk that he was likely to be on his mother's side. Although you couldn't see anything out of it on this handsome face, even with his mother on the brink of tears. Go if you like, said Mrs. Nanga with feigned indifference. But don't tell anyone I sent you. If I am not to grow bigger, let me at least remain as I am. I was right about Eddie. He immediately carefully described how to get to Edna's house in another fairly distant part of the village. He even described that the driver take me in their Vauxhall, which showed that in spite of his height, he was still a mere boy. I lost my way a few times before I found Odo's house of red earth and thatched roof. He was sitting in his front room making the rope used for tying yams onto erect poles in the barn. The short pieces of fiber from which he worked lay beside him in 3 bundles, one of which had become loose at the girdle from depletion. The rope he had made so far was rolled up in a ball lying between his feet. He held it free hand in his hand and tied new lengths of fiber to it. When I came in, he was strengthening the last. When I came in, he was strengthening the last knot by pulling hard at it across his chest, exposing his locked teeth in the action. He was a big man with an enormous shining stomach, sitting on the rolled-up portion of his loincloth. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hair graying. We shook hands, and I took a chair facing him and backing the approaches to the house. He said, "Welcome," several times more. While he walked, "I must carry the death of a kola nut," he said, retying a knot that had just come undone under his pool. "I got finished this morning." "Don't worry about kola nut," I said, and added after a long pause, "You do not know me, I am sure. I am one of the teachers at the grammar school." "Yes," he said, looking up. I knew it was a face I had seen. We shook hands again and said welcome, and apologized even more for not having kola nut. And I replied that it was not every day that people had kola nut. Since the woman of the house went into hospital, there hasn't been anyone to look after those things, he said. "I hope she will become well again. We are looking on the man above." After a suitable pause, I asked about Edna. "She is cooking the food to take to the hospital," he replied. "I have a message for her from my friend Chief Nanga." "You are a friend of my in-law? Why did you not tell me so? Have you come from Bori then?" "Yes, I came by yesterday." "How true? How was he when you left him?" "He was well. He turned round on his seat towards a door leading into the inner room and raised his voice and called out, "Edna." Edna's voice came back from the interior of the compound like a distant flute. "Come and salute our guest," hollered her father in the same loud voice. While we waited, I felt his eyes on me, and so I made a special effort to look as usual, as casual as I could. I even turned round on my seat and inspected the approaches to the compound, and even formed my lips as though I was whistling to myself. "Has your wife been in the hospital a long time?" I asked. "Since 3 weeks, but her body has not been hers since the beginning of the rainy season." "God will hear our prayers," I said. "He holds the knife and he holds the yam." Because of my position, I could see Edna as she came into the middle room. I suppose she must have washed her face with a little water dipped into her palm. She was now wiping it as she approached us with a corner of her lapel, which she dropped as soon as she saw me. A big something caught in my throat, and I tried without success to swallow it down. She wore a loose blouse over her lapel and an old silken head tie. As she emerged into the front room, all my composure seemed to leave me. Instead of holding my hand still seated as befitted a man, and one older than she, to boot, I sprang to my feet like some woman-fearing Englishman. She screwed up her face ever so tightly in an effort to remember me. "I am a teacher at the grammar school," I said a little hoarsely. We met the day Chief lectured. "Oh yes, it's true," she said, smiling gloriously. "You are Mr. Samalu." "That's right," I said greatly. You have a good memory on top of the beauty," I said in English, so the father would not understand. "Thank you. Perhaps it was the way she was dressed and the domestic responsibility she was exercising, or perhaps she had simply grown a little bit more since October. Whatever the reason, she was now a beautiful woman and not a girl, looking as though she was waiting to be taken back to her convent." "Sit down, teacher," said her father, a little impatiently, I thought. Then turning to his daughter, he announced that I had a message from Bori. She turned her large round eyes to me. "Nothing really," I said, embarrassed. "Chief Nanga said I should come and greet you and find out about your mother. You may tell him she is still in the hospital," he said. Edna's father said, in a most unpleasant tone, and that her medicine cost money, and that she planted neither cassava nor cocoyam this year. "Don't listen to him," said Edna to me. The happiness wrenched out of her eyes. She turned on to her father. "Did he not send you something through his wife?" "Listen to her," said the man, turning to me. Because she ate yesterday, she won't eat today." "No, my daughter, this is not the time to enjoy an in-law, not even when he has claimed his wife and gone. Our people say if you fail to take away a strong man's sword when he is on the ground, will you do it when he gets up?" "No, my daughter, leave me and my in-law. He will bring something and bring something. I will eat until I am tired, and thanks to the man above, he does not lack what to bring." "Excuse me," said Edna in English, and then explained in our language that she that she must go and finish her cooking and take lunch to her mother before 1 o'clock, or the nurses would let her know. She smiled vaguely and turned to go. And I had the first opportunity of noticing that her back was as perfect as her front, which happens once in a million. I watched every step she took until she disappeared. Then I sat on alone with her greedy, avaricious father, for that was the impression I had just formed of him. We said very little. I whistled my silent tune and watched his rope lengthen as he tied one short piece of fiber after another to it. When he had produced a reasonable length he wound it onto the ball. Edna came into the room again, and from there her father, if he had given the stranger a coconut. And her father asked her father if he had given the stranger a coconut. I have none, he said. If you have, bring it and I will eat. I bought some yesterday. I told you. She brought the coconut in a saucer and gave it to her father, who brought the coconut after a short avaricious prayer about bringing and eating, threw lobes into the mouth, and after the other crunched them more easily. Then I had ever heard anyone crunch cola nut and pass the saucer to me. I took one of the remaining two and returned the saucer to him. I sat on, and then, not knowing what else to do, should I get up and go? That was hardly sensible. I suggested I should wait until Edna came out again, even if there was no chance of talking to her privately. Then a wonderful idea struck me. Why not offer to give her a lift on the bicycle to the hospital? It was at least 2 miles away, and my bicycle had a good carrier at the back on which the foot can be tied. Now that I am here, I told my busy host, I ought to go and see Edna's mother, so that when next I write to Chief, I shall have something to report. I don't need what my daughter says, he told me. I don't hear what my daughter says, he told me, looking up from his work. Tell my in-law that the treatment of his wife's mother is costing me water and firewood. I shall certainly say so, I told him. No matter what I might think of him, it was clear to me that he was not the kind of man to be bypassed in trying to reach his daughter. Mama. Right, 30 seconds. Record in the long run. In the long run, like, and if you're about. Nefiok, urabon. I'll have to discontinue that one because of my eyes. Okay. Chapter 1. Pangshin, Plateau State, August 1994. Gideon was already drenched in sweat from jogging to the training center by the time his coach, Joseph Wubara, walked into the Sandy Sports Park. Gideon was already drenched in sweat from jogging to the training center by the time his coach, Joseph Wubara, walked into the Sandy Sports Park at the village center. He was always most punctual to training. The weather was cold and dry, although the Harmattan season was not due for another 2 months. Its haze had started to creep up, threatening its harsh conditions. It had not rained for over 3 weeks, and the north desert wind had blown dust, which polluted the atmosphere, even at the altitude of Jos Plateau. Gideon had jogged the long distance through the hard coast sand and rocky pathway from his home to Pangshin. This distance was now a routine to him, and he would still jog back home after his rigorous workout, which included long runs up the mountain and speed walk for kilometers through the sand. The township sport ground was at the Pangshin village center, about 16 kilometers from Kanke, the small suburb where Gideon lived. Born in Tuam Kabua, a little-known missionary town in Pangshin, local government area of Plateau State, to Reverend Gideon Genka and Mrs. Birhatu Nanswake Genka. Little Gideon grew up running errands. Between his home and the community community church where his father served. He loved running. It was his way of life. It was the path he had chosen. Pangshin was a small region in the large state of Plateau, rich in agricultural produce, but always in the shadows of Jos Metropolitan, the state capital city, due to their close proximity. However, this region had been a manufacturing hub for Nigeria, for some of Nigeria's best distance runners, all under the tutelage of Wubala, the legendary coach manager. Coach Mandakara, a former employee of the Kwara State Sport Council, moved to Pangshin local government area, where, when he became a staff of the Plateau State Athletics Amateur Association, he quickly saw the potential of the region, of the Amateur Association, to produce national athletics champion. A lot of the Nigerian national long-distance champions had come from that local government area. Zakaria. Pamfo won gold in the 1989 National Sports Festival, winning the men's 3,000 Masters steeplechase in a national record time. Kenum Bunem got a national record in 1993 for the 5,000 men by Emmanuel Dewan Bala, Jonah, Joseph Ezekiel, Simeon Male, Damian Udom, Sunday Mai Angua, Monica Ubala, Fidelia Victor, and Philemon Kumchi. The late police woman Sergeant Ladi Musa, who was a top marathoner for Nigeria until the sport she loved so much claimed her life in 1990 during the edition of the International Milo Marathon, all held from the same town. Okay. The schools in the area were also instrumental in developing their talent. Government Secondary School Pangshin drew global attention from its spectacular performances at the World Schools Marathon Championships in Spain, Germany, and St. Joseph College, VUM, also thrilled the world a few years later at the same championship. Pangshin could be Nigeria's equivalent to Kenya's Rift Valley if the development and investment can be made for facilities. It has the terrain and weather that made distance running a promising venture. Located about 80 miles from Jos, the Plateau State capital, the little town had, in addition to its altitude and temperate weather, very rocky formation, numerous hills and mountains that helped prepare these athletes through their daily sporting activities. It wasn't therefore surprising that in 1991, the deputy chairman of the Pangshin Local Government Council, Mr. Samson Tempo, honored over 15 athletes from the area for winning national titles, one of which was Gideon Haka. Gideon was already enjoying the history of untainted support in the distance running. His talent was discovered early by Coach Dakara. His talent was discovered by Coach Dakara while he was still a student. I was still a student at the Ekan Primary School, Towa, Kabua, between 1978 and 1981. Blessed with an eye for sporting talent, Dakara occasionally went to the local schools to watch the young boys and girls play and run during and after school hours. It was during these occasions that he noticed young Gideon. When Gideon left for Kankuk Comprehensive Secondary School, Dakara made his move. He brought Gideon to compete in the state's cross-country competition and men's distance race. Gideon was an instant success, winning numerous competitions in the state. Gideon continued He studies at the relevant technology school, Pangshim, where he completed in 1991, specializing in welding. No. Mà nói đi bao giờ thì cần sao? Okay. So Gideon was already enjoying a history of untainted success in the distance running. His talent was discovered early by Coach Dakara while he was still a student at the Ekan Primary School, Tuwa, Kabire, between 1978 and 1981. Blessed with an eye for sporting talent, Dakara would occasionally go to the local schools to watch the young boys and girls play and run during and after school hours. It was during these occasions that he noticed young Gideon. When Gideon left for Lanok Comprehensive Secondary School, Dakara made his move. He brought Gideon to compete in the state cross-country competition and men's distance races. Gideon was an instant success, winning numerous competitions in the state. Gideon continued his studies in the relevant technology school, Pangshin, which he completed in 1991, specializing in welding. With his studies completed, Coach Dakara worked on Gideon's international recognition. It was then that he actively took sports as a career. His first breakthrough was winning the Plateau State's 20-kilometer mini marathon, a trial used to discover talents that would represent the state in national distance races. At only 19 years old, Gideon finished 11th, which qualified him to represent Plateau State at the Lagos Marathon that year. Following that, Gideon became a prominent feature in state, national, and national competitions, placing 6th and 7th at the International Milo Marathon in 1991. In 1992, winning the Amateur Athletic Association of Plateau State Marathon and also 30-kilometer race while placing 3rd in the 5-kilometer race. Gideon had grown so much that when the Plateau State Government Sport Council delayed in offering him an employment contract, he was quickly contacted by Benue State in 1992. It took the effort of Coach Wubala to bring him back after 2 years of success in exile. Coach Wubala was a tall, dark, athletic figure with piercing eyes. He was well respected in Pangshin. He stood surveying his group of young and experienced athletes alike, already waiting for the day's training session, and took Gideon in, drenched in his own sweat even before starting training, and smiled. They were prepared for the 3 to 4 hours of difficult mountain climbing, running, or strength work. But that day was different. Instead of the old stopwatch he usually clenched in his right hand, Ubala had a little piece of paper. It was a letter for Gideon, an invitation from the Athletics Federation of Nigeria, referenced AF-IMR-VOL-VOL.IV-173, entitled Release of Mr. Hagak Gideon. The letter, signed by the Secretary General, started off in the following manner. I am directed to inform you that Mr. Hagak Gideon has been selected to represent the country at the International Milo Marathon coming up in Accra, Ghana in 1920 on 24th September 1994. He is expected in Lagos to commence immediate rigorous training in preparation for the race. Training was over for him that day. He needed to go and prepare for his trip to Lagos. It was an all-expense trip for an international competition. He loved life, he loved his sport, he loved Nigeria, he loved Athletics Federation of Nigeria. Chapter 2. Lagos, Sunday, October 9, 1994, 7 a.m. It was evident by the atmosphere. The whole stadium was busy. It bore a resemblance of unruliness and disorder as people moved haphazardly about the arena. Hawkers of various items made a cacophony of noise, as if trying to outdo their competitors in a shouting contest, while advertising their cheaply produced goods. Cars hooted loudly, trying sometimes vainly to find a convenient parking space. Athletes, both professional and recreational, trooped into the stadium, jostling for prime position at the starting point. The noise was deafening. The activities were chaotic. Chaos, yes, it was, but unlike what its appearance suggested, it was organized chaos. Everything knew where they had to be. Security knew where they were stationed in strategic areas, while the warders directed traffic in such a manner that it flowed seamlessly. The crowd was not unexpected. This was the Milo-sponsored marathon race. It had been going on for a decade now. It had become a fixed event in the annual athletics calendar, and everyone looked forward to the engrossing physical test of human endurance. Already, the Athletics Federation of Nigeria, AFN, had promised that this 10th anniversary marathon race would be one to remember. Speaking just 10 days earlier at the press conference to usher in the race, Chief A.A. Bassi, the chairman of Road Race and Walking Subcommittee on the board of the AFN, promised a beautiful race to mark the occasion. He had revealed that they expected their biggest race till date, as they had sold over 1,000 entry forms, with Lagos alone amounting for an excess of 600 entries. Runners from Ghana and Kenya had also indicated their interest to participate in the event, he revealed. Bassi had taken time to inform the public of the unprecedented and elaborate steps this team had taken to ensure a smooth and flawless competition. We shall engage the services of 350 officials, most of who will be deployed along the route. Adequate medical coverage for the participants has also been arranged. A total of 50 medical personnel, medical and paramedical personnel, will be in attendance. Also, provisions have been made for water, drug, ambulance. We went on further to state for further arrangement, for adequate arrangement and effective security, crowd and traffic control. We have arranged for 250 police and traffic personnel, 10 outriders and 2 pilot vehicles, and 4 other special vehicles which will shuttle along the route during the race. We ended up this address with a lot of pride as their development plans were on course, with evidence that a Nigerian had won an international marathon. I am happy to inform you that at the Accra International Marathon held on Saturday, 24 September 1994 in Ghana, our representative performed very well. Mr. Gideon Haggard came first in the men's race with 2 hours 26 minutes 64 seconds, and Ms. Shola Ogundele came fourth in the women's race. The sponsor was not left out in eulogizing the event. The marketing manager of Nestle Food Nigeria PLC, parent company of title sponsor Milo, Mr. U.E. Adigbe, revealed that prize money had been increased and that there would be gender parity for winners, with males and females winning each. Males and female winners each going home with 100,000 naira dollars. $100,000. Nestle Food Nigeria PLC started the sponsorship of the Milo Marathon race in 1985. Before then, marathon was relatively an unknown and unpopular sport in the country, while running was a very common activity at all levels within the country. Anything longer than the explosive sprint brought neither excitement nor laurels to the Nigerian people. However, Nestle had sought to use the marathon event to encourage an alert and active citizenry, as well as to make Nigerians embrace jogging and running as means of keeping fit. It also hoped to provide a forum where selection of talent that would represent Nigeria in international competitions would take place. To generate interest in the race, Nestle Foods Nigeria PLC had to sponsor 3 zonal races before the final race in Lagos each year. By the end of the first 4 years of its sponsorship, the zonal races had been hosted by about 10 major cities, including Ibadan, Enugu, Kaduna, Jos, Abeokuta, Owerri, Kano, Bauchi, Port Harcourt, and Benin. Initially, the races were only open to those residents in Nigeria. By 1988, the race went international, with participants coming from all over Africa. Now, in its 10th year, Nestle Food PLC was determined to make it a great race. It had been a great year for Nigerians and sport. This year alone, we won the African Cup of Nations after a 14-year break. Alibe reminded all those who cared to listen. We also made our debut appearance at the FIFA World Cup at USA 94 and played so well that we emerged the 9th best soccer playing nation in the world, and we rated 2nd best entertaining team in the tournament, second only to Brazil, the world champions. And only recently our contingent to the Commonwealth Games in Victoria, Canada, came back with a whopping 37 medals, 11 of which were gold medals. We then added, Milo, as you all know, is the official food drink of the Super Eagles and is also the official food drink of our national athletes. So it was with pride and a sense of fulfillment that Sponsor and Athletic Federation of Nigeria went about organizing the marathon. The main organizing committee with 5 other committees were set up. They were charged with the responsibility of ensuring a free race done by international standards. So it was with pride and a sense of fulfillment that both sponsor and Athletic Federation of Nigeria went about organizing of the marathon. A main organizing committee with 5 subcommittees were set up that were charged with the responsibility of ensuring a hitch-free race done by international standards. The committee comprised members from the AFN, representative of sponsors, Inside Communications, brand managers of the sponsors, National Sports Commission, Royal Exchange Insurance and Assurance, the official insurance of the Nigerian Police, the Nigerian Police Force. The committee ranged from people in charge of the secretariat, sponsors, media, government security, etc. It was all encompassing. Athletes from other African countries were expected. Ghana, Benin, Republic, Kenya, Ethiopia, who due to lack of funds could not eventually make the trip, that had registered their interest. This was going to be truly an international event. The sound of the traditional old Calabar tune streamed loudly from the instrument of the police band in the stadium as the athletes shuffled into their positions. The steel barricades and a series of armed policemen separated them from the crowd who came to see them start, very visible, trying to make sure all was okay for the race, was the technical director of the AFN, Mr. Rotimi Obajimi. Obajimi was a soft-spoken man whose quiet pitch of voice filled the very energetic man in him. An athlete with average performance in his youth, he had developed cerebrally to become one of the most informed and educated technical men in Nigerian athletics. It was his responsibility to ensure that the race went on smoothly in accordance with the rules and standards of the IIF. The marathon route was unchanged from the previous year. It had been mapped and certified by E.J. Fajeshola, a licensed surveyor. The route would take the athletes through the central Surulere, passing through Alaji Masha Road and Bode Thomas onto Alaka, where the athletes would link the famous Eco Bridge into Lagos Island. They would run via the popular CMS bus stop through Onikong, passing the Lagos Boat Club, Kefi, and Dodam Barracks in Ikoyi. A long stretch would take them through Ido, Ebute Meta, and Panti police station, and onto Ikorodu Road, where they would reach Maryland, then head back to the National Stadium via Ojuelegba. Prior to the race, everything had gone on well. Even the route tour, the athletes had a couple of days earlier went ahead without incident. However, Obajimi admitted that they had not expected such a crowd. It would be a big task to keep the finish route clear from the stadium gates to the tracks of the main bowl, where the race would end. This was done to make sure that the elite athletes were well positioned. The top Nigerian men Gideon Agag, Abbas Mohammed, Umaru Mohammed, Adamu Aliyu, Buba Umar, God Day Okorocha lined up against Benson Muruiku from Kenya, Stephen Manu from Ghana, and some of his colleagues, Adonjo Frederick, Nifa Richard, and Zakio Stephen. At 7:43 a.m., 17 minutes behind schedule, the special guest of honor, Colonel Olugunshoyo Yinola, military governor of Lagos State, arrived at the starting point of flag-off of the race. The dignitaries that accompanied him included Alhaji Rahim Adejomo, President, Nigeria Olympic Committee, Mr. Babayo Shehu, the Director General, National Sports Commission, and Chief O.O. Oshunkeye, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Nestle Nigeria Limited. Boss. Chapter 3. (10:23). It started as a rumor, then it spread through the main bowl of the National Stadium, where the spectators, invited guests, and dignitaries were waiting for the runners to return to the finish, where the gantry was still being constructed. The electronic timer display was showing that it is well over 2 hours since the race had started, and any time from that moment, the leading athlete will arrive. There had been no way of communicating with the spectators as to the update of the race, as there was neither live coverage of the race nor mobile communication at that time. The race official at that time used walkie-talkies, whose range and frequency did not have a very long reach. But then the rumor became louder, as it became increasingly likely that a Nigerian would triumph over all the foreign athletes that came to compete. This was exciting. There was excitement from the spectators around the stadium. As rumor gained ground, this would indeed be a historic moment for Nigerian athletes. Could Nigeria possibly become a force to reckon with in the long-distance race? As the news agency, the AFN official, that a local was in the lead. As the news reached the AFN official that the local was in the lead, they talked uncomfortably in low tones and moved about worryingly. The official timekeepers were all jostling about, while other race officials were talking in pairs or threes with visible curiosity on their faces. Ordinarily, it should have been a proud moment for them, but there were lots of issues that surrounded a homeboy win. First of all, the sponsors had, at the prompting of the Federation, invited top 10 world-class international marathoners in order to give a 10th edition a more global appeal and to make it more respected on the global stage. A local winner with no international background could question the credibility of the event. Also, the credibility of the AFN would be called to question, that despite the availability of funds, they did not get the top athletes to compete. Instead, for second-rate athletes who were much cheaper to invite, this would not put the Federation in good state with its sponsors. So even before the athletes made their way into the main bowl of the national stadium, Set. Obajimi. Obajimi was a soft-spoken man whose quiet pitch of voice fueled a very energetic man in him. An athlete with average performance in his youth, he had developed cerebrally to become one of the most informed and educated technical men in Nigerian athletics. It was his responsibility to ensure that the race went on smoothly, according to the rules and the standards of the International Association of Athletics Federation. The marathon route was unchanged from the previous years. The route, it had been mapped and certified by E.J. Faji Shola, a licensed surveyor. The route would take the athletes through Central Surulere, passing through Alhaji Masha Road and Bode Thomas onto Alaka, where the athletes would link the famous Eko Bridge into Lagos. They would run via the popular CMS bus stop through Onikon, passing the Lagos Boat Club Kefi and Dodam Barracks in Ikoyi, a long stretch would take them through Ido, Ebute Meta and Panti police station and on to Ikorodu Road, where they would reach Maryland, then head back to the National Stadium via Ojuelegba. However, Obajimi admitted that they had not expected such a large crowd. It would take a big task to keep the final route clear from the stadium gate to the tracks of the main bowl, where the race would end. All was done to make sure that the elite athletes were well positioned. The top Nigerian men, Gideon, Abbas, Omoru, Adamu, Buba, Godde Okorocha lined up against Benson Mariku from Kenya, Stephen Manu from Ghana, and some of the Adonjo Frederick, Mifa Richard, and Azakio Stephen. At 7:48 a.m., 17 minutes behind schedule, the special guest of honor, Colonel Olukunshoye Oyinola, military governor of Lagos State, arrived at the start point to flag off the race. Dignitaries that accompanied him included Alhaji Rahim Adejumo, President, Nigerian Olympics Committee, Mr. Babayo Shehu, Director General, National Sport Commission, and Chief O. Ushunkeye, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Nestle Foods Nigeria PLC. As it started like a rumor, then it spread through the main bowl of the National Assembly, where the spectators, invited guests, and dignitaries were waiting for the runners to return, to finish where the gantry was still being constructed. The electronic timer display was showing that it was well over 2 hours since the race had started, and any time from that moment, the leading athletes would arrive. there had been no way of communicating with the spectators as to the update of the race, as there was neither live coverage of the race nor mobile communication at that time. The race officials at the time used walkie-talkies, whose range and frequency did not have a very long reach. But then, the rumor became louder as it became increasingly likely that a Nigerian would triumph over all the foreign athletes that came to compete. There was excitement from the spectators around the stadium. As the rumor gained ground, this would indeed be a historic moment for Nigerian athletes. Could Nigeria possibly become a force to reckon with in the long-distance races? As the news reached the AFN officials that a local was in the lead, they talked uncontrollably in low tones and moved about worryingly. The official timekeepers were all jostling about, while the other race officials were talking in pace or threes with visible curiosity on their faces. Ordinarily, it should have been a proud moment for them, but there were lots of issues that surrounded a homeboy win. First of all, the sponsors had, at the prompting of the Federation, invited top world-class international marathoners in order to give a 10th edition a global appeal and to make it more respected on the global stage. A local winner with no international background would question the credibility of the event. Also, the credibility of the AFN would be called to question, that despite the availability of funds, they did not get the athletes to compete. Instead, going for second-rate athletes who were much cheaper to invite. This would not put the Federation in good state and its sponsor Nestle Foods Nigeria PLC. So even before the athletes made their way into the main bowl of the national stadium, the narrative may have already been set by the officials of the AFN. The high pitch of the dispatch rider's siren pierced through the air and interrupted everyone's thoughts. This was the affirmative sign that the race leader was arriving. With ebullient stunts, the riders sped into the stadium, lights flashing from the power bike after the riders' entertainment distraction had been acknowledged. Everyone in the main bowl watched the race drama unfold. The leading runners entered through the gates of the main bowl of the huge applause. Because of the way the marathon course had been designed, the runners had started off at the National Stadium Surulere, which was where they would also end. They were to head south into Alhaji Massa Road from the start, then link up Bode Thomas Road via Adeniran Ogunsanya Road. The runners would then run through Alaka and head south to Eko Bridge on UTC. Akbombo. The course then took the participants through CMS bus stop and Onikon, passing the Lagos Motor Boat Club on to Kefi and Dodam Barracks. The race direction then followed to Obalende, then King's College on Nnamdi Azikiwe Road, passing through Ido. The runners were expected to join Herbert Macaulay Road through Ebutemeta and Panti. They will run northwards onto Jibowu on Ikorodu Road, where they would head via Anthony Bus Stop to Maryland. They would make a U-turn at Maryland, then run southward on Ikorodu Road directly via Ojuelegba back to the National Stadium. While the race lasted, the thousands of spectators waiting at the National Stadium where the race would finish were oblivious about who the leaders were. So one could imagine the uproar at the stadium when the dispatch rider finished his stunts at the finish area, only for the race to offer the spectators the instant freedom of seeing a Nigerian being the first to enter the main bowl. Okay. This is one thing about another. To local athlete buffs, the very familiar small frame of Gideon Haggard was very recognizable as he entered the stadium, about 10 meters ahead of the Kenyan, Benson Muriuku. His jersey was hanging on one shoulder, and his bib 555 barely hanging on a pin to his vest. Both runners looked knackered from the tedious race, with sweat profusely drenching their clothes and bodies as they entered the stadium from the south end. They still had 300 meters on the track to run before reaching the finish tape. The sweltering heat from the mid-morning sun had taken their toll on them. Muriuku appeared to suffer from the sun's effects more than his Nigerian opponent, as he contorted his face in a vain attempt to conjure some extra strength in order to improve on his speed and close up to Haka. On his part, the Nigerian running comfortably, even with his vest hanging out from one of the sleeves. You found this? On his part, the Nigerian running comfortably, even with his vest hanging out from one of the sleeves, just sashayed through the track as if he owned the turf. His smooth running style and the imminent victory of a Nigerian runner adrenalized the crowd. They yelled in encouragement, and some tried hard to push their way through the steel barriers and police officers that stood as a palladium for the barrier. Apparently, the roar of the excited crowd also had a salvific effect on the Kenyan as he began to gather momentum and started closing the gap on the leader. Hagak may have sensed that his opponent was gaining ground on him, and he was not going to run all that long and labyrinthine route this marathon had taken through, only for him to lose it at the last 100 meters. And so, with his arms pumping wildly, he powered on. The vociferous crowd responded to his action and cheered him more. The police band, directed by a sergeant, very smartly and colorfully dressed in full ceremonial outfit, played their trumpets, bugles, drums, creating a fast-paced, energetic and melodious music to motivate the runners. It was amazing to see how the impresario conducted the music with synchronized rhythm. And beats to the tiring athletes, while he had his back to the activities on the track. Everything happening was laced with excitement. Even the stadium decor, gussied with sponsors' banner, and the colorful dressed volunteers contributed to the great atmosphere, and thankfully, the runners were playing their part. The noise was deafening. The announcer added to the drama by running a documentary as the two athletes reached the last 50 meters. His voice reverberated around the stadium as he urged the runners on, building the excitement as he announced with each step that the Kenyan was catching up to the Nigerian. The two runners were evidently tired. Eventually, the grit of the Nigerian runner pushed him past the finish tape, about 2 meters ahead of the Kenyan. It was an emotional moment for Hagak as he collapsed on the ground, totally exhausted with tears of joy pouring out of his eyes as supporters and well-wishers finally breached the security parameters and swooped on him. They had just unearthed a new national hero, winner in Accra just a fortnight earlier, now a hero at home. Unmindful of his need for air and that he was still trying to catch his breath, Gideon Hajak was carried shoulder high by his supporters as victory praises was sung out loud. The body language was that of uncertainty, while the timekeepers at the finish line were focused on the other runners. On the other runners as they were now finishing the race in larger numbers. The officials from the Athletics Federation of Nigeria were meeting in different pockets and groups by the finish gantry. Rotimi Obajimi, AFN Technical Director, can be seen looking agitated, while the Federation President, Smart Akrakra, though he also had a look of confusion on his face, was calm. There were a series of discussions between the race officials and Obajimi. It was not long before these movements produced murmurs and then rumors, which started spreading around the stadium. Our hero was a cheat. He had cheated he had cheated. How else could he have won this race? When did Nigerians start defeating Kenyans in marathon? Have you ever heard of any Kenyan win 100 meters in Africa? That was our stronghold. This is theirs. There must have been something very fishy. There must have been something very fishy. It was already about 10 minutes since Gideon Hagak had crossed the finish line. First, he was still celebrating, and he had done his laps of honor with his teeming fans. He was now seated in a makeshift mixed zone, surrounded by pressmen who were now totally ignorant of the discontent among the fans and the AFN officials at the time.